That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, my dudes, I just want to remind everyone something that is so important, and that I think this channel is a little bit different than other ones you're going to find on YouTube. Here, I think that your opinion matters significantly. Now, I will say that I think the majority of you in the comment section, I think I'm smarter than you, and I think that we're going to continue to crush you in those fantasy drafts every single night that we live stream. So make sure you're dropping those likes, subscribing to the channel, and most importantly, coming out to our live streams every single night where we are streaming our drafts on Underdog Fantasy. We'll talk about that one second. But anyway, because I think that your opinion matters, and a lot of times I get something wrong or I don't necessarily see it from a different perspective, please make sure you continue to leave those comments. Let me know exactly what you think. Now, don't just go down there and say, Mason, you're an idiot. Mason, you should have never made this video, blah, blah, blah. Instead, you should go, Mason, you're stupid, but here's why. Here's what you got wrong. Here's what you were missing. So please make sure you continue to leave those comments down below. And going back to our live streams every single night, guys, if you have yet to be able to make it out to one of our live streams, just know that we are streaming every single night fantasy football drafts on Underdog Fantasy. By far and away the best way to prepare for the season, where you actually get to play in real money leagues that you don't have to set the waiver wire for through the season. You don't have to submit your starting lineups. So you're going to be able to get through about 5 drafts to get some real practice in, because we know if you're in a mock draft against a bunch of people that are going to eventually be auto drafting by round 4, that's not helping you prepare at all. If you're drafting against a computer, you are literally wasting your time. You're not doing anything. And what's fantastic is if on Underdog Fantasy, you use promo code FLOCK, you are going to get $25 added to your account so you can get into those drafts. You can get your practice in, and all you need is a $10 deposit. And if that wasn't enough, you're also getting our 2021 Fantasy Football Draft Guide and all of our rankings and tiers. So make sure you go take advantage of that offer. And let's get into the wide receiver rankings, and let's start it off with Devante Adams. Now with Adams, y'all already know, this is someone that I have ranked as the 3rd player overall. The only players that I have ranked over Devante Adams are Christian McCaffrey and Dalvin Cook. Now, we did one day have Alvin Kamara there, but the thing is we had to move Alvin Kamara down one spot, given the fact that Taysom Hill, maybe is going to get more playing time than we thought this year. So I think that is going to jump Devante Adams up into a range where he jumps all of those running backs that have small red flags attached to them. Where Devante Adams, you're looking at him as a wide receiver that literally possesses the upside that I don't think we have ever seen at the wide receiver position in fantasy before. Now, we have already gone through and we have already talked about in depth exactly how good Devante Adams was in 2020, where you pull up his points per game, guys. Not only was Devante Adams the wide receiver 1 in fantasy, he averaged 25.7 points per game, which crushes the field. In a regular season, the wide receiver 1 in fantasy averages about 21 points per game. So this is like a 15% increase on that. And to go with this, Devante Adams did this while missing almost the entire game in week 2 when he left early due to an ankle injury. So if you remove the game that he left early due to that injury, and you're just looking at the sample of games that Devante Adams played in fully, Devante Adams averaged over 27 points per game. Now, if you stack this up against wide receivers of all time, the all-time greats at the wide receiver position, this is the best wide receiver season on record in history of fantasy football. How is nobody talking about this? How is nobody talking about Devante Adams elevating his game to a range that we have never seen before? He beats the 2007 Randy Moss. He crushes the 2019 Michael Thomas. And everybody is overlooking it because Aaron Rodgers in that saga and that news kind of overshadowed exactly how good Devante Adams had of a season last year, when all we're talking about this offseason is, is Aaron Rodgers going to be there? Is Aaron Rodgers going to be there? And nobody's paying attention to what actually happened. Now, I will say 100%, of course, just understanding how numbers work, you know Devante Adams is going to regress. Devante Adams isn't going to go back-to-back seasons as the best wide receiver of all time in fantasy football. If that was going to be the case, he would be ahead of Dalvin Cook in the rankings, but we know he's going to regress. And the main reason he is going to regress is because he actually averages 1.28 touchdowns per game last year. And if you just look at that, you understand, okay, it's impossible to project a wide receiver to score a touchdown a game. You have to drop that down. So if we go through and we go, okay, well, Devante Adams is going to regress. how much can he regress and still be in a range where he is elite beyond really anybody else touching him? You go through and you take away 10% of his production that he had last year. So just assume Devante Adams only scored 90% of the points per game that he did in fully healthy games. Then all of a sudden, Devante Adams falls from being the best wide receiver of all time to the best wide receiver of all time. That's exactly how good he was. Now, he's probably going to regress a little bit more than 10%. Maybe he regresses in terms of 15% around that range for his points per game with what he saw as a healthy season last year. So if you go through that and you understand that Devante Adams going to crush the rest of the field at wide receiver, he's in his own tier ahead of Stefon Diggs, ahead of Tyreek Hill. I think that you have to take him for his floor as well as his ceiling over the running backs like Alvin Kamara, Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, Ezekiel Elliott, who all have small red flags here or there. So yeah, Devante Adams, I know that a lot of people don't want to draft a wide receiver in round 1. Personally, I think that he's a higher floor player and he has a ceiling that is just as comparable to the running backs. So why would we not draft Devante Adams in round 1? Going to be one of my most drafted players this year. And now, of course, the wide receiver 2 is going to be Tyreek Hill. I mean, this is not going to be surprising to anybody either. Now, with Hill, the main question is, what range of the draft do you actually drop him to? So if you pull up my rankings, like we said, you use code FLOCK, deposit $10 on Underdog Fantasy, you're going to get paid $25 to do so, and you get our full draft guide, hundreds of pages of information, as well as our 2021 rankings. You look at that list, you see that we have Tyreek Hill as the 8th player overall. So we actually have it where Derrick Henry is our 6th player overall, Ezekiel Elliott at 7. Then you have Tyreek Hill at 8, Aaron Jones at 9, Austin Eckler at 10. Just to give you all a kind of range of where we were seeing Tyreek Hill. Now, I will say I've been breaking down a lot of teams in leagues where you're only going up against 7 other guys. It's an 8-man league and you only start 2 wide receivers and you have a flex spot. I will say in a specific format like that, then I think all of these wide receivers need to get bumped down. But where I'm going to be targeting Hill in the middle to the end of the first round is in those formats where you need to start 3 wide receivers each and every week, or you have multiple flex spots. Because if you read our draft guide, you see that we provide the exact numbers on how your league format actually dictates where you want to be going in your draft and how you should be structured your draft around your league format. We cover literally everything. So understanding that is going to be crucial. But if you do decide that you want to go with the receiver in the end of round 1, I think Hill's going to be that guy. Very little to talk about here. I mean, this is a player that last year, yes, he was unsustainable with his own touchdown rate where he scored a touchdown a game. You're not going to be expecting that to happen even in an offense as potent as the Kansas City Chiefs. But what's very important is he actually had 9 targets a game last year. And with Tyreek Hill, what was surprising is you would assume that his yards per target would be a little bit higher given his speed as well as his quarterback play. But surprisingly, that was a lower yards per target than what Hill has had over the past 3. And this is typically what you find. You find that when players begin to get more volume, the efficiency will slightly dip down. But I think with Hill, you could actually see some regression in expecting a higher yards per target and a lower touchdown rate. So Tyreek Hill, I think he's a very safe bet. Obviously, you have Sammy Watkins leaving this offseason. Not necessarily thinking Tyreek Hill can see any more targets per game than 9. I think he's almost capped out around that range, given the fact that if you're going to be expecting a wide receiver to be getting 10, 11 targets a game, usually those are going to be guys running a lot of crossing routes, guys running slants. I mean, we all remember Michael Thomas in 2019, the king of the slant round. That's how you get a lot of volume. That's how you get a lot of those guaranteed receptions. With Hill, he's always going to be a player that I think relies a little more on efficiency, but he's playing in the right offense to do so. So now let's go to our next receiver, someone that literally, if you're coming out to those underdog drafts with us, I swear to God, he goes at the 1-2 turn every single time. That team decides to double up on wide receiver literally every single draft. Stefon Diggs here as our wide receiver 3. We have him ranked as the 11th player overall. We have him directly behind Aaron Jones, Austin Eckler, and he's the last player in that tier of those guys that are going to be mid running back 1s as well as high end wide receiver 1s. So Stefon Diggs, if you're drafting near the end of the first, I actually really like him. Like we said, make sure you're checking your league format to understand if you should be going running back or receiver. But here with Stefon Diggs, the volume was ridiculous. You actually had Stefon Diggs seeing over 10 targets a game last year in Buffalo. And you know, when you're playing with Josh Allen and you're as talented as Stefon Diggs, This is something that can be sustainable season to season. Now, what was surprising is you actually see a slight dip in his yards per target from the year prior in Minnesota, but don't be worried about this at all because you really need to understand how he was utilized in the Bills offense versus the Vikings offense, where with the Vikings, he was used in 2019 at least as literally just a field stretching wide receiver. This is why he was so frustrated and why he forced his way out of there, because they completely miscast him. They were just asking him to run vertical routes so they could clear out the defense underneath. I don't understand why they were using him in that role, but as soon as he gets to Buffalo, he becomes a traditional alpha wide receiver that is seeing targets at every level of the football field. And this is what you need to have that elite producer in fantasy. And also, we know what you want to do is you want to fade touchdown rate. You always want to be buying the players that you think are going to positively regress with their touchdowns. And here with Stefon Diggs, that can potentially happen. He actually only had 0.6 touchdowns per game last year while seeing over 10 targets a game, while expecting Josh Allen to have that big arm and have those long connections. I actually would expect that number to slightly go up. So he finished as the wide receiver 3 in fantasy last year. I think that's a very safe baseline on where we should be expecting him to go this year. But both with Tyreek Hill and Stefon Diggs, to draft them over one of the running backs or over Travis Kelce, it's going to be crucial to understand your format. That's what we talk about on Patreon all the time. That's what we focus in on depth. I mean, I think that's the number one thing that's better about our draft guide than any other draft guide that you're going to find. Is I have 30, 40 pages just talking about how your format dictates things. And I lay it out with graphs. I show everybody exactly what I'm talking about, whether or not you're adding a flex spot, going from a 12-team league to a 10-team league, whether you're going to a 10-team league to an 8-team league, whether you're going from PPR to half PPR to no PPR. Really, there are so many different variables. So understand, the more teams that you have and the more starting lineup requirement spots that you also have, then wide receiver is going to be placed at a premium because you want slightly more depth at the position. But if you're playing in a league where you only have 8 other owners and you only have the potential to start 3 wide receivers on a week-to-week basis, you do want to be passing on both Stefon Diggs and Tyreek Hill for a running back. So now our next wide receiver that we are going to rank, I need your opinion on this one because I think maybe we're wrong here. We're going to go with DeAndre Hopkins. And a big reason I'm going with DeAndre Hopkins is A, elite quarterback play, which we know to expect from Kyler Murray. B, with DeAndre Hopkins, he is the highest floor player that I think you can take in fantasy. I mean, we have seen him since he came into the NFL in 2013 as just a dominant alpha wide receiver that misses no time whatsoever. DeAndre Hopkins has literally missed like 2 games in his entire NFL career. I have no idea how some players are built like this. Because I'd imagine that, yeah, some players, they can go through their NFL careers without sustaining really any injuries. But when you're a receiver that is consistently seeing 10 targets a game, you pull up the past 3 seasons for DeAndre Hopkins, it is laughable how consistent he has been. Where in 2018, 10.2 targets a game. In 2019, 10.0 targets per game. In 2020, 10.0 targets a game. And I'm going to be honest, I was a little bit worried about him going to Arizona, leaving the Deshaun Watson situation, because I thought with Watson, he was in a clear role where he was going to see 30% of his team's targets. And going over to Arizona with Cliff Kingsbury, we know Kingsbury is supposed to have this spread offense where he is spreading the ball around, getting every option of the game open, where that didn't necessarily correlate. That didn't matter whatsoever. I mean, the quote-unquote spread option turned to more so, let's force feed DeAndre Hopkins the ball as much as we can. That's exactly what you saw. His volume didn't fall off whatsoever. I don't think we can say Kyler's as talented of a passer as a Deshaun Watson, but still, now you have Larry Fitzgerald leaving this situation. And while we are expecting Rondale Moore, Christian Kirk to be able to pick up the slack, and we are expecting AJ Green to get a ton of run in terms of snaps that he plays in this team, I don't think the 24-25% team target share for DeAndre Hopkins is going anywhere. I'm viewing him as a wide receiver that you can confidently draft, know you're getting 16 weeks. I've been consistently taking him at the beginning of the second round in those live streams we're doing every single night. So yeah, DeAndre Hopkins, we are going to have him over our next wide receiver in Calvin Ridley. Now, if you pull up our overall rankings, they're literally neck and neck, where we have DeAndre Hopkins at 14, Calvin Ridley at 15. So maybe you actually see us take Ridley over Hopkins in a draft just because, like I said, guys, we are going to be putting so much money, you would never believe it, into fantasy drafts this year. And at the same time, we're going to have 250 plus teams. So because of that, I have to diversify somewhere. But anyway, Calvin Ridley, he's going to be the guy you expect to go over DeAndre Hopkins in fantasy this year. with Calvin Ridley, we have him ranked as our wide receiver 5. We have him ranked as the 15th player overall. And obviously with Calvin Ridley, the main story is Julio Jones going over to Tennessee. Now, what I have showed in an in-depth video breaking down Calvin Ridley, I don't have the numbers in front of me. You're going to have to believe me on this one. But Calvin Ridley was just as elite with Julio Jones playing last year as he was without. How we viewed this is we viewed the snap counts for Ridley and Jones in 2020. Now, I want to remind everyone, both Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones were suffering injuries as the season progressed. They also played a lot of games where they were injured and they only played 40% of the snaps. So if you're trying to look at their points per game in a vacuum, if you're trying to look at their split saying, okay, Hopkins played in this game, Ridley played in this game, that's a valid thing to put into this bucket versus this bucket. No, you have to dive a little bit deeper. You have to look at the snaps because there will be a lot of games where, Julio Jones, technically he played, but he played 30% of the snaps. He wasn't out there. He went out there, he got injured, he left the game. So if you look at the games where Calvin Ridley played over 70% of the snaps for the Atlanta Falcons, he was an elite wide receiver. At the very top, I believe he was the wide receiver 2 in points per game, only behind Devante Adams. Now, if you look at the games where Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones both played 70% of the snaps, so they were both out there every single game, well, you actually had a scenario where Calvin Ridley scored just as many points. So the presence of a Julio Jones did not affect Calvin Ridley at all this past year. Now, what affected Ridley, if you're looking at some certain splits, is did Calvin Ridley play enough? He needed to be on the field to score points. But if you look at the correct splits, Calvin Ridley looks like a bona fide stud with or without Julio Jones. And Kyle Pitts coming in, I think Kyle Pitts is going to be able to take enough defensive attention away to still make it where Calvin Ridley is an elite wide receiver in fantasy, and we know that he has that upside. Now, to be completely honest, this next wide receiver is going to be a tier down for me, where if you pull up my rankings, literally we have DeAndre Hopkins at 14, we have Calvin Ridley at 15, and then we have a tier of just running backs in the rankings of 16 through 20, and then all the way down at 21, we have DK Metcalf. Now, with DK Metcalf, I will say that if you're following our rankings or if you think that they're valuable at all, you're probably not going to be drafting them that often, because especially in those underdog drafts that we've been doing every night, we are starting to see DK Metcalf climb up the draft board slowly but surely. All of a sudden, I think DK Metcalf, we're going to wake up and he's going to be an early second round pick. Now, the thought process behind this is obviously sound. As you're looking at DK Metcalf as a receiver with access to a ceiling that not many players have. He's attached to one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the NFL in Russell Wilson. At the same time, he has the size, speed, athleticism that really shows that, he could just completely go nuclear 1 year. Nobody would be surprised if Shane Waldron, the new offensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks, maybe some people would be surprised. I don't think you should be. Nobody would be surprised or should be surprised if he comes in and jacks up the passing rate. Now, I know a lot of people want to say Brian Schottenheimer got fired because he didn't run the ball enough. I think Brian Schottenheimer got fired because he was a horrible offensive coordinator. Maybe it was because he didn't run the ball enough. But if that was the case, why all of a sudden are they bringing in the offensive passing game coordinator from the Los Angeles Rams to Seattle if they want to run the ball more? I understand there are a couple different factors going into that, but to just look at this and automatically assume that the Seattle Seahawks are not going to skew a little bit more pass happy than they have in the past, and they're actually just going to get down to ground and pound every single game, I think you're not necessarily looking at the overall fantasy football season that's upcoming in terms of probabilities, which is kind of how I view the game. I view the game and going, okay, what can happen? Here's the ceiling. Here's the floor. What's going to be likely in between? I think if you look at this, go, okay, the ceiling of a DK Metcalf is Waldron comes in, jacks up the passing rate. Wilson maintains his efficiency that we have seen so many times before. DK Metcalf, a size speed freak going into his third season in the NFL, takes another leap up and he becomes a top 1 to 2 wide receivers in the NFL. That's completely possible. It is also possible at the same time that possibly DK Metcalf comes out and they actually really want to run the ball. All of a sudden, DK Metcalf's a high-end wide receiver too, just because there's not enough passing volume. So it's a wide range of outcomes for Metcalf. We don't know how the offense is going to be operating. Now, that's why I do have him as our wide receiver 6, because we can't acknowledge the ceiling. But at the same time, we can acknowledge that he is not in the same tier of a DeAndre Hopkins. He's not in the same tier of a Calvin Ridley. You could never consider ranking DK Metcalf any higher than 6 at the wide receiver position. But please let me know if y'all think I'm wrong, because This is the one thing that I think that, I mean, you're going to have a fantastic argument if you want me to move DK Metcalf any higher than this. But thank you, my dudes. I really hope y'all enjoyed this video. And of course, if you want access to our full 2021 rankings, make sure you go down to the description of the video, use promo code FLOCK on Underdog Fantasy, deposit $10, get our full draft guide, hundreds of pages, get our rankings at the same time, get paid $25 to do so. Come out to a live stream with me tonight, hop in some drafts. And yeah, that's all I got for you, my dudes, and have a great day. Thank you to everybody supporting the show on Patreon. We got some new members in MCGC, Brian, Matthew, Craig, Ian, Woody, Colt, Marcus, Jack, and Nicholas. Thank you, my dudes.